And finally, you did a little foray into pro wrestling. You actually went through training
briefly
for a wrestling company. Like, did you do like the full back, like the bumping and the rolling and like?
Well, I'm a first degree black belt. I did that in high school.
Okay.
And the reason I got into wrestling is because I knew how to bump.
Okay.
For those of you guys who don't know what bumping is, it's in karate, it's called a break fall. So there's a way stuntmen, professional wrestlers, and judo people land to minimize the damage that is done to your body. Don't get me wrong.
Spread it out.
Yeah,
throughout
spread
the body,
out. You slap the mat, any of that different stuff. Watch Glow. If you watch, which is amazing, go watch Glow anyway. But they show how to take. It's called, in wrestling they call it a bump. In everything else they call it break falling, because it's how to break your fall. So I got into it because I always thought wrestling was dumb. After I was like 6, I was like, it's you when the guy punches, he moves his foot. Like that was, that type of stuff. And I went to my friend's house. He was watching Monday Night Raw on tape. It was on a Tuesday, and I had karate on Monday. And I came over and I watched Kane chokeslam X-Pac.
Okay.
And Kane grabbed X-Pac by the throat, lifted him up in the air, and then planted him on the ground. And when he landed on the ground, X-Pac did a back bump, which is a back break fall. And I go, I know how to do that. And then he did a spinning back kick. I go, I know how to do that. And I'm like, even just hitting targets, that's exhausting. And I'm like, oh, and then I got it. I'm like, yeah, they're not competing, but they are doing athletic things. So like it's like watching a gymnast or watching ice skating. It's the same thing. So I got into it for that reason. But the other thing I really loved about it is I love the theatrics, and I really loved promos. Because to me, promos and stand-up are the same.
Yeah. And you would think, like, going into a wrestling situation, if you had the physicality, if you have a black belt background and you're a stand-up comic, you already check 2 boxes that might.
So I got when I met my wife, I got out of wrestling when I went to college. I got into it again in high school, and then got out of it when I went to college, because also kind of was getting lame then. And then met my wife, moved in together, got engaged. Right before we got married, like literally like 6 months before our wedding, I super got back into wrestling again one day. Like I just out of nowhere, like I heard about how the wrestling fans booed Roman Reigns and The Rock in Philadelphia. It became a Philly pride thing. I'm like, we booed The Rock? Everyone loves The Rock. What is happening in wrestling? So I started watching it, and I learned about all this different other stuff that was happening. And meanwhile, and I got back into wrestling, and it was like a secret. I was hiding it from my wife. Mm-hmm. It was almost like I was secretly watching wrestling. And then she came home one day, and I was just like, I like wrestling. She was like, okay. And then she walked away, and she was like, I like RuPaul's Drag Race. It's the same thing. And she's right. It is.
Yeah.
They're all staged. And so she walks away, and then I got super back into watching wrestling, and I felt the old tick started to like crawl up my neck. Like, hey, maybe you don't really like you like stand-up, but you really like performing. Mm. Maybe what you want to do is be a wrestling manager. And I was like, I don't know how to do it. And then I remembered, oh yeah, my old friend from Secret Pants, Bryce Remsburg, works for a wrestling promotion, is a referee. That promotion has a school. So I went and did some show. I think Bryce was running it, and I got blackout drunk, pretended the entire show that my fiance had just left me. That was like the idea behind my idea for my character of the show.
Okay. And
kept whispering to Bryce that it's a work, which is wrestling for fake. But I'm like, it's a work. She's such a bitch. Like that was the whole show. And then afterwards he was like, hey man, if you're serious about like wanting to be a manager, like we're having an open thing, come see how it is. Mm-hmm. So I went down and went to the Chikara up in Northeast Philly and, showed up, and it was exactly what I thought it was, learning bumps and doing push-ups and that stuff. And I just signed up for the 101 class, which was fun, debilitating because I'm in my early 30s and like my body does not bounce back the way it did when I was 17.
I'm sure.
And so I could go to work the next day. Like I couldn't turn my neck at my head. Like I had to turn my whole upper body because I couldn't. It was like I was wearing a neck brace. Like I should have just been wearing one. I was lying to people and telling them I was doing Tough Mudders every weekend because I was too embarrassed. So during that time, though, right after my wedding, like literally like the month after my wedding, and then my honeymoon, right before I left on my honeymoon, I was still training there. And doing the 101 course. Again, it's not much. It's not too crazy. It's bumps. You learn how to do like basic flips, planches, stuff like that.
Chikara has launched a curriculum where it's 101,
which I think is much better because they used to, a lot of the wrestling schools just do what they call core, which is they're like
pay us $3,000 and you're going to be here for a year.
You show up whenever you want, and then you're going to learn whatever we're doing that day.
Yeah,
and it reminded me more of the karate classes, which I think is the way they do it, or like the improv.
Yeah,
same thing. So anyway, the ring announcer, the guy who announces coming to the ring, this guy. I'm explaining it for your audience.
I know.
Coming to the ring, this guy. He got a show and he couldn't ring announce, and they had a big tour coming up. So Bryce asked me to come try out, and I showed up and tried out along with some other people, and they chose me and 3 other guys to do different stuff. But I had the 4-night tour, which was cool, and that was my first foray into professional wrestling. Got back from my honeymoon the next weekend, flew to Minneapolis by myself on Frontier Airlines, landed and met a bunch of wrestlers there at the airport. You could tell they were wrestlers. That was how I kind of figured it out. Then got in a van and we started doing shows. I wasn't a right fit for it for a couple different reasons. One, I immediately cursed while holding the microphone in front of children, which is a no-no in Chicago.
Kid-friendly.
Very kid-friendly. They're very emphasis on kids-friendly. The fake combat is for the children, which I agree with. It was my fault. I was just used to just saying curse words. I meant there was talking about their one product. I said, sounds like a pretty good fucking deal. I just meant to say pretty good deal. It was not intentional. They edited it out. But I already knew I was on a strike there. But the guy who does it now, Vlad, was a better fit. He's playing a character.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. He actually is a friend of mine. I gave him some hints and pointers of what I learned from my 4 days on the road with him. And I kind of also learned, too, that, I like stand-up touring better than I like wrestling touring. Wrestling touring is debilitating, awful, and it smells terrible. It just smells bad. Everyone's constantly hurt and upset. And all they ever want to do is eat terrible fast food. When I do stand-up, it's when you do stand-up, you get to your venue city, right? You get there, you get there at your pace, you know? There's no one else. Maybe you have another comic with you. I like whenever I do bookings out of town, if I don't know anyone else on the show, I try to get a guest spot for somebody I think it needs one and who doesn't have a car, and I get them to ride with me. And that way I don't have to do the drive by myself. It's my main reason. I don't want to drive an hour and a half alone. My wife doesn't want to go with me. And I'm going to be weird by the time I get there. So it's a way to warm up. With wrestling, I'm sitting in the back of a church van, driving across the greater Midwest. And it's just surrounded by bags, getting to places, having to change myself, learn all these different names. There's a whole, I'm also starting again at the bottom. I'm one of the upper-ish tier on Philly, level comedy, open mic comedy, whatever you can call that. And then I show up for wrestling. I'm just this, hi, I paid for I'm in the 201 class. Okay, so your name is Chuck Taylor? Whatever. They don't know. Yeah, the guy's huge. Oh, what's your name? Heidi Lovelace? Yeah, she's on NXT now.
Yeah.
Oh, what's your name? Drew Gulak? Oh yeah, he's been wrestling for WWE now for a year and a half. And that was one thing that was cool though. Those people who I met, who I rode in that van with specifically, are all the ones who actually are now stars in wrestling. So, and I've known other people who've made it in comedy, but not ever in comedy. You never quite make it. Right. Oh, I had a Netflix special.
You're only as good as that last show.
Yeah, the last thing you did.
You still have to keep going.
Yeah, exactly. But it's I've had friends of mine who've had a show. A friend of mine recently did a show on CISO. We're cool. Years ago, you got on the Tonight Show. You made it.
Yeah.
Now it's my friend says, yeah, I had 15 minutes on CISO. Cool. What did the 10 people who pay for that think of it? Well, it's run by NBC. What did the 10 people who work at NBC whose wives paid for that think of it? No matter what you do, I've opened for Dan St. Germain and all these other different people who were up and coming then, and I watched them make it, and I'm yeah, they haven't made it. They're still doing free podcasts.
Yeah.
They're still doing Chuckle Hut. They're featuring at Chuckle Hut. I'm you have a half-hour special on Comedy Central. Yep. It means nothing. But in wrestling, if you at least make it, that's the big show. It's in baseball. You make it to the major league. You make it to the big show. In wrestling, you make it to the WWE. Doesn't even matter if it's just for one day. You made it.
Yeah, Drew Gulak can be back in Philadelphia with Chikara in a couple of weeks, but he still was on.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. He will still always be. I'm a former WWE wrestler,
and he'll get paid more because of that.
Yeah, and he can go and forever add more to his bookings for it.
Yep.
But like, some other guy who, what did you do? Oh, I was on a premium blend. I don't give a shit. Who do you think saw that? Because with wrestling, everyone who watches wrestling watches WWE. With comedy, you have no idea what comedy people watch anymore.
No, because it's so splintered and it's everywhere.
Splintered. That's why wrestling is, to me, it's the last true unified niche.
Yeah.
Niche?
I say it both ways.
Do you?
Yeah.
See, because even that's splintered.
Yeah.
Thanks, England.